Nelson Mandela said, "It is said that no one truly knows a nation until one has been inside its jails." Hello and welcome to BaldPolitiKs again this fortnight, where we take an alternative look at the world of politics and we give a voice to the unheard as well. I'm Peter Carney and this is the 9th of November 2016. This is, of course, a very sad day because it is the day that the United States elected Donald J. Trump as its next president for 2017 and for 4 years thereafter. Sad because of the promises that he made during the election campaign, the racist promises, the Islamophobic promises, the sexist remarks, the allegations of the attacks on women as well. And all of that was brought before the American people and still they voted for him. Unfortunate as it was that Hillary Clinton was the alternative, so it could very well be seen as a rejection of Hillary, but also people were in full knowledge of Donald Trump's opinions on a number of issues and still they voted for him. So it really is a very sad day. We await with a certain amount of trepidation as to what's ahead of us for over the next 4 years and even beyond should he secure a second term. So it really is a very sad day for democracy, particularly as the United States is the largest democracy in the Western world. So as I said, we await with trepidation to see what happens from here on out. Also on this day, the 9th of November, through the years of history, in 1620, this is the day that the Pilgrims aboard the Mayflower, they sight land at Cape Cod, Massachusetts. So that in many ways was the start of what you have today in the United States. If only they hadn't made it, how different things might have been. In 1791, you had the foundation of the Dublin Society of United Irishmen. The United Irishmen was indeed a group of people who were united of all religions against British rule in Ireland. And in 1989, East Germany opens checkpoints on the Berlin Wall and they allow their citizens to travel to West Berlin. Significant political birthdays on this day. In 1961, we had the birthday of Jill Dando, fellow journalist, who was murdered in 1999, and I believe that case is still open. The murder of a journalist in the UK. So on this fortnight show, on BaldPolitiKs, we're speaking to Brian Terrell. Brian Terrell is a Catholic worker, a member of the Catholic worker movement. He's also a member of a group called Voices for Creative Non-Violence. So Brian has experienced firsthand the United States prison system, having been incarcerated himself on a couple of occasions. He talks a little bit about that in the interview. He is also going to talk to us about the work of the Voices for Creative Non-Violence, VCNV, in Russia, and the steps that they're taking to build better relations between ordinary Russians and ordinary Americans. So we're going to hear from Brian in the interview that I did with him last night.
I work with Voices for Creative Nonviolence and have for some years. And my entire adult life I've been involved in the Catholic worker movement, been a peace activist. Mm-hmm. So, my work with Voices especially has brought me to... I've been to Afghanistan several times, twice in the last year, mm-hmm. and just recently returned from Russia. And part of our work is nonviolent direct action, protests at military bases and other government institutions. And in the course of that, I've ended up in jail quite a few times, and I think that's what you wanted to talk to me about.
Yeah. Yeah. So just before we get into that, can you just tell us something a little bit about the Catholic worker movement? Because not too many people might be familiar with that.
Okay, actually, it's today's November 8th is Dorothy Day's birthday. She was one of the founders of the Catholic Worker, which began in 1933. And she's a woman who lived an interesting life, had been a anarchist and socialist. She was a member of the Industrial Workers of the World and had been a journalist, had written for the Masses and the Call, different communist newspapers in the United States. And when she had a conversion and became a Christian and a Catholic, she had the realization that she could still be a radical and be a Catholic at the same time, very much going against the flow.
Yeah.
But then actually she found that the Gospels, the Sermon on the Mount especially, and the prophets of the Hebrew Scriptures and the Catholic tradition have a critique of capitalism of their own, which is even, she thought, more radical, a stronger one, a better criticism, in the words of Peter Moore, her co-founder of the Catholic Worker, than even Marxism. And so it's more of as Peter Moore called it, a organism rather than an organization.
Okay.
So our communities are spread around the United States. There's one in Dublin. There's several in other European places, and then in Latin America as well.
And how are they received by the Catholic hierarchy?
It varies. In some places, very comfortably, and in other places, it's with great difficulty. I spent 7 years in Davenport, Iowa, at a Catholic worker house where our relationship with the local bishop and the institution was very, very cordial, and they liked us because they could, when people asked why Catholics aren't doing anything about the war in Central America, for example, or about homelessness, they could point to us and say, there are some Catholics who are doing some good work. And then when people were complaining about our radicalism and our pacifism and things, they could say, oh, they're not us.
Okay. So quite convenient for them.
Oh, yes.
Right.
And
Okay. And then Voices is the other group that you're involved with, Voices for Creative Nonviolence. Can you just tell us a little bit more about them?
Yeah, it's more of a organism. It's not a very formal organization. And we have, it grew out of the sanctions against Iraq between the two wars. It's very little known in the United States about this, but from 1991 until 2004, the sanctions against Iraq were just terrific, and almost nothing came in, and very little got out. There were, just in the first few years, more than 500,000 children under 5 died because of these sanctions. The war in 1991 destroyed the infrastructure of Iraq, especially its capacity to process sewage and process drinking water. And they were not allowed to import any of the things that they could use to fix that, because, of course, things like chlorine and pumps and all these things, could be construed as being dual use. They could be used to make weapons. So the society was really very stressed. And at the time, it was very illegal. It was punishable up to 12 years in prison or $1 million fine, which we were never prosecuted in that, criminally for that, but we always, in effect, courted it. But we made, during those years, made many visits to Iraq at a time when very few Westerners were going there at all. And we've been, since the end of the sanctions, we've maintained relationships with friends in Iraq, and some friends who are actually in refugee camps in Europe now. Okay. But we have been, especially since 2010, we've had a relationship with a peace organization in Kabul, Afghanistan, and we visit there on a regular basis and support the work they do there.
Okay, good. Now, just to speak a little bit more about yourself and your own work, as you mentioned yourself, you've been in prison a few times. So there's, and in some of the articles that you've written about it since, you've written about the rate of people being imprisoned in the United States. Okay, can you tell us something about that? I mean, is the rate increasing? Is it what's the particular reason for it? Is it really an attack on the poor?
Yes, it is an attack on the poor. It's a that's very, very clear in well, the incarceration rates in the United States are fantastic and unbelievable even to Americans when it's pointed out to them what's going on. There are more than 2 million people in American prisons and some 7 million people under some kind of supervision of probation or something. And mostly, she just read the statistics are today, at any given moment, there are more than 137,000 people in jails on marijuana possession, period. And these are mostly people who have not been to trial yet, because you get arrested and they put a cash bond you have to pay to get out. And people will spend months or years for their case to be adjudicated. That doesn't include the people who are actually sentenced to prison. I spent 6 months in 2013, 2012, 2014, 12 to 13 in prison in Yankton, South Dakota, in a federal prison camp there. Nonviolent federal crimes, mostly drug related. Very few white collar fraud kind of cases, and very gentle group of people. Never had any sense of fear of the people that I was locked up with. But shortly after I got out, I was able to speak to the Harvard University Law School, and I told these young law students that the young men I left behind at Yankton Federal Prison were no more innocent or more guilty than they were. It just is there is no, most of these were people of color, of course, and in the United States, there's no statistic that shows that black people or Hispanic people are more likely to use drugs than white people. In fact, it's quite the contrary. But they're not stopping and frisking people on Harvard Yard. And, these well-heeled Harvard students are able to use and sell the drugs that with very minimal fear of getting arrested. Face any kind of legal consequences, but but for people of other demographics, they're often locked up. I also had an experience this last spring. I was arrested at a drone base, the headquarters for the Air Force drone program in Nevada. And I'd been arrested there a year previously and charged with a pedestrian, that they charged me with a crime of being a pedestrian soliciting a ride on a roadway. In other words, hitchhiking, which I wasn't doing. I was blocking a road very purposefully, and I was not looking for a ride anywhere. I wanted to stay where I was. The ride I got on by the police was not one that I solicited at all. But I had not paid. They fined me $98, and by not paying that, they added a warrant was issued for my arrest and added fees for the warrant and for collection agencies and everything. And finally, by the time I went back to Creech a year later, this last spring, it came to about $400 in fines. And I was held for 4 days before I went to appear before a judge who gave me time served for my fine, and I was released. But I was one of hundreds of people in the jail, that very jail, who were there completely on issues of not paying fines. Of course, I could have paid the $98 on principle. I didn't. But there are many people who have, certain kinds of people are going to be more likely to be driving a car with a tail light out and get a ticket for that. And you don't pay the fine, and eventually it adds up to a few $100s, and you get stopped with another tail light out, and it doesn't matter whether you're innocent or guilty. It comes up on their computers that you have a warrant for your arrest. The city of Las Vegas has, I think, like 4 million warrants out for people, and people go to jail, and it's not a matter of public safety. A person who doesn't pay a fine for hitchhiking is not more dangerous than somebody who would pay that fine. And it's not about rehabilitation. It's not about guilt or innocence. It's a collection thing. And this is a huge part of what makes up the people who are in our prisons.
And you spent a bit of time in prison on that particular occasion, didn't you? Was it 4 months?
No, on that occasion it was just 4 days.
4 days, sorry. 4 days you spent in prison, yeah. Okay. But still, 4 days for the non-payment of a fine. And what's the benefit of that to a local authority? Because is keeping people in prisons, is that not costing money? Why would they do that?
Well, it's fulfills a couple purposes. One is that it is a collection agency, and even if they don't lock people up, the idea that you'll be locked up if you don't pay the fine, a lot of people end up paying fines, whether they're innocent or guilty of what they're charged with to begin with. And eventually, people do cough up the money just to get out of jail if they get caught. But also, it has another. It serves another purpose that I think one of the most flagrant examples is that after everything exploded in the town of Ferguson, Missouri, with the killing of an unarmed black man there, and the world's attention got put on something that's been going on all over the United States for many years. But they discovered a town that has a population of, I think, 20,000, had more than 16,000 warrants. So you have a population where, and a higher court came in and just vacated all those, wiped the slate clean for all those people. But of course, it's beyond Ferguson. It's an endemic situation in the United States. But what it does is you have a community of people in neighborhoods and towns that are predominantly people of color, and often high percentage of immigrants as well. And you have the majority of men who are walking around in those towns and driving their cars on the streets. The police have the right to take off the street and put in jail for anything. They don't have to commit a crime. They can just ask, they can take somebody's identification, run it through the computer, and they've got a pretty good shot that there's a warrant out if somebody fits a certain demographic. And it provides a means of control.
Just if we could turn now maybe to some of the work that you guys have done in Russia. And this is through Voices, isn't it? Voices for Creative Nonviolence.
Yes.
You said yourself that what you were doing there was involved in acts of citizen diplomacy. Can you tell us what citizen diplomacy is first, and then how you employed that in Russia and how that was used as a non-violent means?
Well, I think the tensions between the United States and Russia are really, really high, and from my perspective, the provocations are almost all from the United States and the NATO countries, and I thought it was important to visit. And citizen diplomacy is not a term I'm really comfortable with, because it can mean, and often does mean, private citizens traveling and talking to people in other cultures, or hosting people here in the United States and trying to put a good face on U.S. policy, and almost working in tandem with the diplomacy of the U.S. State Department. And I see very little diplomacy right now in the U.S. State Department of John Kerry and his predecessor Hillary Clinton. I wonder if you can even talk about diplomacy exercised by a nation that has nuclear weapons and has 700 bases in countries all over the world. What it means to be diplomatic when there's this implied threat of violence that can hardly be avoided. But in any case, we didn't go there to put a human face on American policy.
Right.
We went there to meet people and to listen and to hopefully, now that we're back in the States, to talk to people even within our circles and more broadly, and try to talk about the things that we saw and the things that we heard that are very, very different from the things that we're hearing in our media.
Okay. Would you say that U.S. and Russian relations are back to where they were during the Cold War?
I think that it's really, really bad. I think that's probably correct. I think, though, I think there's less awareness of that. There are people who are comparing this to say that at the moment our relations things are about as scary as they were during the Cuban Missile Crisis. And
so I'd like to thank Brian very much for that interview. You can get more information on Brian and the work that he's doing at vcnv.org. That's vcnv.org, Voices for Creative Nonviolence. And if you want to participate in the show, if you want to get involved or give some feedback, you can get me right at the details right here. You can also get me on Facebook. My Twitter handle is BaldPolitiKs as well. That's politics with a K in the end of it. So that's it from me, Peter Carney. Until a fortnight's time, take care.
I was the one when you needed love.